All right, well, we'll get started. This is Joe Walensky. My organization is Writers UA, and I'll be talking to you about touch, voice, and gestures and how that relates to putting together software user assistance. And of course, it will apply to other forms of technical communication as well. I do have video image here. I'll just use this at the start just so that you can see that there's actually a real person on the other end of these pipes making this presentation. So I'm happy to be putting this together for you. I probably have about 30 to 35 minutes of information. I tend to speak fairly rapidly on webinars due to the engagement factor. It always helps, I think, to go a little bit quicker. Everybody's on mute right now. If you have any questions, you can type it into the chat, and I'll definitely check on those at the end and open it up for questions if there are any, and if you want to be unmuted at that time, I can do that. I'll also provide the slides to chapter leaders to distribute so that you don't have to worry about copying down information, URLs, and things like that. And I'll just switch back to the slides now. My email address is listed there. You're welcome to send me a note about anything after this if you have some questions. Before we get started, I just want to thank Adobe because they've been very generous in helping to sponsor these webinars for my time to put the information together, and also the GoToMeeting software service and presentation times. So you might want to check out their products like RoboHelp and FrameMaker and Captivate. So I thank them for their support. The aspect of touch is definitely one that I've worked with quite a bit over the past 3 years, mainly from my work with mobile apps, and I'm just starting to do more work with voice and gestures, and so hopefully this will give you an introduction to some of the things that I'm to that area, and present some of my thoughts on things. One of the first things I like to say is that I really feel like right now we're at a major inflection point for technical communicators that we haven't seen since around 1989, 1990, when there was a transition from a character-based screens and the keyboard to the use of the mouse and the graphical user interface, and that's really been brought about starting with the smartphones with touch. And it's changing a lot of things about how we develop software and about our customers' expectations about how they're going to interact with that software. And so I've run into a number of issues that I've had to deal with that I think all of us are going to have to deal with. And one of the things is that with many of these new devices and these new user interactions, suddenly we have to think about different ways to present information, and we have to come up with different publishing strategies for our information, and I'm going to talk about both of those aspects. And one of the things that makes our job even more difficult is that we actually have a very fragmented situation in terms of platforms. And so for a long time it was Windows, 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 and so now suddenly in addition to a resurgence of the Mac, we have very solid mobile platforms in iOS and Android, and even within Android there's a lot of differences about how people put their applications together. In addition to that, with all these different platforms, it's also very open. There's no set standards for what the user interface looks like anymore. So if you look at a gallery of apps, they really don't look alike, even though they might be part of the same operating system like iOS. They're very, very different. And that has a lot, that requires us to do a lot of thinking about how to present information in those situations. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot recently is a very granular analysis of content for small screen mobile devices and user testing associated with that. So looking at information at the word and phrase level in ways I can't remember ever doing before. It was more attention was given to large blocks of documentation, and now I really look at individual word choices. I mentioned interaction types, and just to define that a little bit better, working with the keyboard is an interaction type, working with the mouse is an interaction type, and then starting mainly with the iPhone 5-6 years ago, touch became very popular. Suddenly we had voice for these platforms. We have Microsoft Connect style hand gestures as interaction types. The stylus is still around, and it's been around for a long time, and the much hated remote control actually doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And in fact, as apps are being delivered to home entertainment systems in the living room, it seems like that remote control is actually still a main device for interacting with the software. And then you have emerging technologies like near-field communications, which are a different type of interaction. And then the mouse and the keyboard are still there, still very strong elements that we have to support. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of platforms now and several new ones that we hadn't had to work with before. One of the interesting parts about working with touch is that multi-touch controls are built into many apps, and these controls are developers are setting up multi-touch gestures that trigger certain features, and it creates a big question as to how you're going to make your customers aware of these features. For example, the left-hand example of Quick Office is like a mobile version of spreadsheet, and if you know to press and hold down between two of the numbers in the rows column on the left, it'll automatically trigger an activity so that you can increase the height of a row. In the center photo pad, you can take an image and minimize it and move it to be smaller than the overall black palette of the background if you wanted to do that to arrange the image. That's something that isn't intuitively obvious. In the Acutera example, if you press and hold down on a flag, it will give you the label for that flag. Now, in none of these cases do you have any information on screen to be able to let you know that that's the case. So that brings up an interesting issue of how do you deal with that? Where do you deal with that? In a lot of cases, first-time user experience, introducing people to certain key features is one way that it's done. Another way is by having additional information that appears to the user at certain times as they work with the app. I'll talk more about that later, but it's definitely an interesting time. And I mentioned the about word choices earlier on, especially I think with small screen devices where there's not too much screen real estate. The words that are on the screen carry much more weight than they might in a desktop browsing experience, and I think it's really worth taking the time to test individual word choices. I find over and over that the text that appears in buttons and on lists is still the first word or term that comes to the programmer's mind when they're doing the initial prototype, and that ends up carrying through. But one of the first times I really really came to, that I became aware of this was a project that I was working on for a mobile app, and one of the screens on the app was a countdown timer that you could start and then move away from it to be able to do other things with the app. And the original word to go away from the timer was dismiss, and they had a lot of questions about this because people were concerned when if they pressed this button, that it would dismiss all of they would lose all of the time that was on the countdown timer. And by essentially taking a thesaurus, coming up with different word choices, and then doing some user testing on that, it was clear that it was possible to find a choice that resonated with people. For example, in this case, hide was something that imparted the right precise thing that was going on, and people were able to understand that this was just going into the background and they weren't going to lose their data. And you can find these examples throughout the smartphone app world. The tough part is being able to make a case for the resources to do this type of analysis and testing. I really believe it's valuable, but it's a very different way of thinking about what it means to be a technical communicator. In many of these apps, there are custom interactions that may not be ones that you're familiar with from other apps. There are not strict standards at all about that type of thing. And for example, in TunePaint, without some instruction, you wouldn't necessarily know that double tapping an icon is double tapping on the screen is going to change the color of the area that you're double tapping. In WaitBot, if you flip the device in landscape mode, it actually changes the display to a graph. And here you can see that a help topic was used to deal with that, and this is actually presented to the customer right when they first start working with the app. In TunePaint, adds a help panel, which again is presented to the customer early on in using the app. And then with AutoCAD, it uses a wizard style for drawing shapes where steps appear on the screen as you move your finger to select information, draw rectangles, and things like that. So in that case, it's directly embedded as you complete the action. And so here you have three examples, very different, but they all are pointing out the idea that it's important to figure out some way to effectively get across these concepts, even in apps, which in a lot of cases people may say, well, apps are so simple, why do you need any help? Well, some apps are a little bit more robust than others, and here's kind of the result of that. In the previous slide, you saw that the TunePaint used finger drawing, and also you can see that here with this app that was the screenshot is from the Nexus 7, and the other screenshot shows two hands holding the phone up for this Layer virtual reality app, which is showing how if you hold the phone, you're looking through it and information gets layered on there. The question now in a lot of these cases is, do you need the fingers? Do you need the hands? How literal do you have to be for this type of thing? And of course it depends on the particular needs of the app, But getting back to the thing I mentioned early on about this being a major inflection point, I remember back in around 1989 when the mouse first came out that I had to spend time, I had to change my documentation to include information about how to use the mouse with my software in addition to how to use the software, because people needed to know that. The mouse was new to them, and so that had to be part of the instructions. After a couple of years, that went away, and people were familiar with the mouse. It wasn't any longer necessary. But now I think we're in that kind of situation where you have to think about this. What do you need to talk about with respect to touch and gestures for people to understand what you're trying to get across? I'm working on the second version of or second edition of my mobile user assistance book, and trying to get a lot of ideas together about best practices for user assistance for mobile apps, and I've put together what I call the 4 C's, which kind of summarize the things that I think are really important about doing that. The Google Earth screenshot that you see there is an app that I think is a really good example of this, and you might want to check that out on your phone or a tablet. I also wrote an article about it, which is on my blog. But just breaking these down really quickly, contextual is that any information that you provide should be offered to the user when they need it, right when they need it, and not siloed in a repository for them to go and search for that. It's really important that if information is something that the customer needs to get past a certain point, that we need to be proactive to make sure that it is presented to them when they need it. And that's the case with the Google Earth user assistance. When you first start the app the first time, you get an option to go through an interactive tutorial, and that information that's presented is very brief. It's just 5 panels, but is directly relevant and really helps getting started working with the app. It doesn't provide more information than that. It's appropriate to what's needed at that time. Secondly, conforming is that the information we provide really needs to fit in with the way that the rest of the app looks. And this is very different from, I think, what we've been able to do with desktop user assistance. With smartphone, tablet apps, people are put off by information that seems external to the app, especially if you have help that's launched in a mobile browser separate from the app. You really want to be native and embedded with the app. And not only that, present the information in a way that looks like the rest of the app. Conditional is to think about what things you can do to present information at the right times to the user and with the right amount of information. So let's say there's a certain more advanced feature. I may want to programmatically wait until the customer has tried to do something 5 or 6 times with the software, and then proactively present a tip that has the information that they could choose to use to possibly make their life a little bit easier. And then conditional text also would refer to an app that's using information that's also from the desktop, where you just pick the content that's relevant to that mobile experience as opposed to what it might be in a desktop. And then finally, that it's concise. That's extremely important. On this screen, I have some samples from my mobile screenshot gallery, and I'll give you the I think I have the link here for it. If not, it's on my Walensky.com website. But I want you to look at these 6 images, and I didn't actually pick and choose from all of the many screenshots I have. I just kind of gathered together several and tossed them out here. And the thing that strikes me about what you see here is that none of this looks anything like what we would think of as traditional online help. Everything here is very much crafted to fit within the context of the app, to look like the app and conform to it, as I mentioned. The information is very brief but appropriate. There's even a couple of screen captures in there. There's visual aids provided, arrows and circles and things like that. There's a lot of craft that goes in here to providing a good user assistance experience. And so I think those, the points that I have presented here are really important. That your user assistance should be visual and engaging, and it's going to be very difficult to automate a solution like this. A lot of our popular help authoring tools promote now a mobile output, publishing output. I think just about all of them have something along those lines, and for the most part, I don't think that they're effective at all. When I watch usability studies of people working with mobile apps, anytime they run into any kind of hierarchy, anytime they have to move from the app to the browser to get information, it's just a big fail. And so although I think the authoring tools do a great job at desktop work, I would really counsel against doing anything that migrates automatically to a smartphone size. I just really think you're going to end up with a lot of crap. And if you don't believe that, I would just say test it and with your own users and see what happens. It looks like I don't have the link to that, but on my Walensky.com site, you should be able to search for mobile screenshot gallery, and there's over 100 screenshots, I think, on there. When we're talking about moving up from the smartphone size, it's possible to have a lot more interactivity, and so you see more intricate touch gestures used on many tablet apps. It also means that you have more room to present information from a user assistance perspective. With tablets, it's very common to see what are called walkthroughs, where overlays are used or some other form of tutorial to present features to the customer as they start working with the app. There's kind of the pros and cons to doing a walkthrough, and I wrote an article about that on my website, so you might find that interesting. In terms of just learning about what kind of touch is supported on different platforms and what the terms are, Luke Wroblewski wrote a great resource a couple years ago called the Touch Gesture Reference Guide, which is freely available, and it shows all the different terms used for different platforms and what they mean, and it's very useful to look at that. And in fact, I took some of that information and manipulated it into some tables because I wanted to look at comparisons for certain words between platforms. And so here you could see the interaction verbs between three different mobile platforms. For the most part, they're the same, but there are a few differences, and you may need to have a discussion within your team as to what to do if you're supporting a certain platform and it uses some verb that is different from the other platforms. So, for example, the difference between drag and pan, which would you support if you were supporting documentation for Windows Phone? It's an interesting question. and it's not one that I have a specific answer to. I think it really depends on how you want to support your users and what the governing conditions are regarding your resources. And there continue to be new touch interactions as well, especially multi-touch. So I show a few real oddball ones that are part of iOS 6. And essentially programmers could use those to trigger events, which gets back to the dilemma I talked about earlier. And then we have new vocabularies in addition to touch. We're just getting used to tap and double tap, and now you take something like Microsoft Connect, which has a gesture vocabulary. It has its own terms for different gestures. Windows 8 comes with a whole slew of new interactions that are very different from anything anybody's done before. And in fact, Windows 8 gestures, to me, get right to the crux of that 1989, I need to explain the mouse in addition to explaining my app kind of thing. Because when I look at the modern apps in Windows 8, if there are, I really feel that it may be necessary for modern app developers to include specific instructions about how to work with the different possible interactions if you in fact want to expect that people are going to be able to find that. Now that's going to change over time as well. I just heard in a Windows Weekly podcast the other day that for the latest version of Windows 8 that's coming out in October, that it's now going to have tutorials about how to work with touch gestures for people, which wasn't in the original version of Windows 8. So something like that might help. And then you have controlled vocabulary like the forward sync. Users need to learn what terms to use to be able to query effectively to have getting certain information from their automobile. I mentioned a little bit earlier about conditional text, that there is a growing need for single sourcing. If you haven't been involved in single sourcing content, I think you're almost going to have to do it as we get more and more device types so that you can have a single repository of your content and then allow a tool to be able to intelligently and gracefully scale information for the different devices. And there's two parts to this. I give a whole talk just on this area, but just briefly, for me, there's two parts to it. One is responsive design, which is adjusting the presentation to be appropriate for a particular device. Adaptive content is where I'm looking at different information types for different interaction types in different devices, and recognizing that a mobile user may want information that's different or expressed differently than somebody that's sitting at their desk. And I'll use conditional text in my authoring tool as a way to be able to manage that. HTML5 using media query can be a way for the right type of information to be delivered based on the device that somebody is using at the time. And to really make all this work, you need to start working with some form of content management system or authoring tools. Just as an illustration, this is a procedure topic within Adobe's RoboHelp product. And so here you have just a standard procedure topic. And what you see in here is all of the possible information that might be presented, but then I'm going to go and select information to only be relevant to certain types of devices, whether that's a large screen or a phone or a tablet or however I want to identify that. I may even completely change a sentence in terms of its length or the way that it's written, and in fact have two versions of a sentence and tag them so that one is used in one circumstance and another is used in another circumstance. And then what you'll get on the output side is information that's appropriate for the different devices. And so here you can see that there's different information for the laptop version, the phone version, and the TV version. And notice that in addition to the amount of information changing, that the verbs also change. So in the laptop version, you have the click. In the phone version, the verb is using tap, and in the TV version, it's using the icon for the connect hover command. And so my authoring tool is taking care of that with variables, but I've identified the verbs that I want to pay attention to in the authoring tool. And so what I use to help me manage that is what I call a command language interaction table. In some situations, I may decide I want to use generic verbs like select, scroll, and move. In other situations, I may feel that it's important to use interaction-specific verbs. So for select, then I have click, tap, the icon for hover, and then if there was voice interaction, whatever the person would be saying in that situation. And then that's equated to a variable name, which I can use in my authoring tool to then automatically put the right verbs in the right places. Just to show an example of how this might be relevant to your life if you haven't done it yet, here are two help topics from Windows 8, and I'm assuming both help topics were written by Microsoft teams, but they represent two different points of view about how to write these help topics for Windows 8. So if you look at the one up in the top left, if you look at the one up in the top left, it says swipe in from the right edge of the screen, tap settings, and then tap change PC settings. So, and then under that, in parens, it says if you're using a mouse, so-and-so, move the mouse pointer down, click settings, so-and-so. So the point of view here is clearly that it's touch first. So that's the primary procedure sentence. And then it's obvious that the mouse is secondary to that. Moving down to the other screen capture, take a look there. Step 1, tap or click. Step 2, in the left pane, tap or click. Tap or click. So in this point of view, the author definitely is treating touch and click the same. And I think it's important for organizations to, well, decide one way or the other to do that. Figure out what your point of view is and make sure that you have a style guide that reflects that. Then even beyond that, what I think is interesting here is that Windows 8 technically is supposed to be able to support any kind of interaction types. So voice, stylus, potentially Xbox Connect gestures, to interact with apps. So I'm wondering if that's even been a discussion for this group at all, because clearly here it's just touch or the mouse, and obviously those are the main gestures. But if you truly want to be supportive of these different interaction types, then you need to come up with some other strategy. And then finally, I want to talk about voice a little bit, in a little bit more detail. this is something that I've been saying for 20 some years, that if we ever get a good voice API that will then be able to provide a real great alternative to traditional text documentation, and we're not there yet. It almost seems like we're like really close, but and then in other ways we're really not. So just in the last few years we've seen some significant voice interaction capabilities added to Android, to the iPhone, the iPad, to Windows Phone. However, in the case of iOS and with Android, so far that's really been controlled in terms of where it's used, and we don't have the third-party APIs that we need, and that's the real key element. That's what we have to be looking for, is for example, the iPhone to publish an API so that then as an app developer I can program in to listen for people asking for help about my app and then deliver the appropriate information either by voice and or by text that appears on the screen. The Windows Phone actually has that API available, and I played around with that a little bit and wrote an article about it, but I haven't actually done a project with it yet. But I'm looking forward to hopefully doing that. And then automotive, which I just noticed I have a typo there, so I'm sorry about that. Automotive's interesting in that the user assistance that they provide in cars is really crappy, but most of the major manufacturers have actually been working with voice recognition for quite a while. So if you go and test drive cars, you'll find a lot of voice interaction, and in many cases there's user assistance to help users learn how to use the voice interaction, which is one of the issues that I mentioned before about the inflection point situation. You can see an example of that on the screen capture there. And I wrote an article related to that when I checked out the Honda Accord. But I think automotive is an interesting place to look because they've really worked on building voice interaction devices into the cars. So that's about all that I had prepared for this particular presentation. We've gone just about as long as I wanted to go anyway for the talking portion. If you have a question, please type it into the chat, and if you'd like to say it audibly, we could do that as well. I just wanted to mention that I do have a conference coming up all the way on the other end of the country. So that may not be necessarily relevant to what you're interested in, but maybe check it out. Newport, Rhode Island is a really cool town. If you've never been there, it's a great place to visit. On the first day, we're going to take a bus tour that's included in the registration to check out the town, and then we'll go off and explore the many mansion museums that are there in Newport. Through next Tuesday, if you put in the code STC, you'll get an additional $100 off, so it's just $695 for the social networking day on the Sunday, and then 2 full days of educational sessions. So you can find that at writersua.com. I want to thank Adobe again. I also put in links to my resource directory, my blog, and a place where you can see courses and presentations that I'm putting on. All right. Well, if you could do me a favor, even if the conference isn't of interest to you, if you have a way to post or share that with your colleagues through social media or something, it's very much appreciated to help get out the word. I very much appreciate that. Let's see. There's a question from Julie Pickering. Do you have any user research data on the effectiveness of layered guides for first run experience or new feature intro. So, well, first of all, it's kind of always hard to come to have user research data that isn't NDA related or can apply broadly. So many things are so specific to individual apps. But let me ask, Julie, are you referring to like the mobile app ecosystem or the traditional desktop browser type applications, or just generally? If you could type in a little extra information there, or actually, if you have your headset, let's see. I unmuted you in case you have your headset. If you just wanted to say your question yourself. Are you able to? Did you want to talk about it, Julie?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, you can. Okay. I have no headset. I'm talking in my room. Sorry.
All right. Well, it sounds great.
Oh, cool.
So don't bother buying a headset. Sounds really good.
Oh, yeah. I saved myself some money. I just wonder, I think at the Convey UX conference in Seattle this last year, a lot of people kind of chuckled at these layered guides as a first-run experience, and the designers, and were saying that, you know, because those are such transient experiences, you know, and you show people, oh, you'll find this here, this there, they run through that so quickly, and it's not, as you were saying before, can't remember which of the C's it was, whether it contextual or conforming, but in the moment when they need it, it's not there, so they've forgotten that experience.
Yeah,
with those layered guides. I kind of recall, for example, LinkedIn, I think either when they do new features, introduce new features, or possibly on the first run experience on the iPad, they have a pretty extensive layered, you know, overlay, kind of filmy overlay showing the navigation. And I personally didn't find it helpful and as an enduring learning tool.
Well, the way I feel about it, whether it's for a small app or a desktop app, is that people are always only interested in information that's going to help them at that moment.
Right.
And it's always been a big mistake when you provide too much information up front or force people to then go search through too much information. And I think the right balance is to really think about what's appropriate at different points in time, like that Google Earth example. It's a very minimalist introduction, but it's optional. And if you go through it, you get a ton of good information in a very quick amount of time, but it doesn't get into all of the other features of Google Earth. Then ideally, an app would then programmatically, as I mentioned, be able to give you hints as you move along. And I think people appreciate that as well. So I think it's more a matter of how you do it. And I talk about the pros and cons of walkthroughs in that article that I referenced earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, I look forward to looking at. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to put Julie back on mute and look back in the chat. And let's see, any thoughts on building relationships with UX? Charlie, I'm going to unmute you to see if you happen to have a headset and you might want to expand on that. So you're now unmuted if you have a headset or speaker. All right, looks like Charlie may not have one. So in terms of building relationships with user experience, it's really important. I've found this in just in software development in general, that it's important to be in all of those design meetings that everybody else is in up front, and not just be relegated to kind of the end of the process. And just by that, you end up uh, building relationships. The other thing is that, to me, I think a lot of the future of technical communication is thinking about what we do as an integral part of user experience. That user assistance is part of the UX, and thinking of ourselves that way, and promoting ourselves that way. And yeah, it's kind of an interpersonal skill, I guess. But I guess that would be my short answer on that. In my book, one of the things I also talked about too was that I think, especially with the app ecosystem, that it's helpful to understand how apps are built and what the terminology is for the underlying elements of an app, so that if you're in those meetings, you know to call different user interface elements by the right thing. Because, for example, programmers can sniff out in a minute whether or not you have any understanding of how the apps are actually constructed. And it helps if they can tell that you do know some of that. On the designer side of things, I've found that if you come into the process of somebody that where most of their recent experience is developing iPhone, Android apps, and you talk in any way about online help in the form that you would find it in traditional desktop browser situations, you're just going to lose people. You're just going to be looked at as a dinosaur. People aren't going to want to consider those kind of ideas. It just looks bad, it sounds bad, and I would just stay away from that completely. I wouldn't talk about using your authoring tool to migrate to this iPhone-y thing that appears in Safari or Chrome. I would go to that idea of talking about crafted solutions. And again, it's a different way of thinking about what we do. You may need to spend several days just working out a help panel that works appropriately with that small screen device, and do user testing with that. And frankly, that's not where a lot of us have had, earned most of our living so far. All right, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat room, so I just put myself up again just to thank you for being part of this, and I'll make sure that you get the information about the slides. Hopefully I'll see you at some future live event, and if not, great success with all of your projects in the balance of the year. And thank you, and we'll sign off now.